Welcome to the second part of our two-part webinar series, When Hackers Met SASE. Part 2 looks at cybersecurity mythbusters and how SASE can come to the rescue. Today we are joined by Itai Maor, Alex Radek, Chris Dilkey, and myself, Amber Pichet. Hi everybody, I look after the marketing here at Farouk Systems. Itai Maor is the Senior Director Security Strategy at Cato Networks and an industry recognized cybersecurity researcher and keynote speaker. Itai is a frequent featured speaker at major industry conferences and is often tapped by major news outlets for his astute commentary on and insights into the cybersecurity news of the day. We are very lucky to have his attention today. You are in for a treat. In the EUC industry, Alex Radek is a veteran. Having played a role on all sides of the spectrum, Alex has been involved in solving application access and delivery challenges and managing teams in charge of improving and securing employee workspace environments for many customers. Alex has been involved with some of the largest and most complex Citrix implementations in North America, and today brings that knowledge to Cato Networks as sales engineer. And finally, Christopher Dilkey is a seasoned IT consultant with over 15 years experience in end-user computing, Citrix ADC, and network security. He has a proven track record of delivering high-quality solutions for large enterprise customers, providing expertise in optimizing end-user experience, enhancing network security, and streamlining application delivery. Christopher is highly skilled in designing and implementing effective, secure, and scalable IT systems. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here.
We read about hacks and breaches almost every day and picture either someone wearing a hoodie or a room full of organized cyber criminals typing away. We are often left feeling either victimized because we got hacked or relieved that we did not. If we want to protect our data, the selection of cybersecurity solutions is vast. However, the assumptions behind these solutions are often false. Yet they have been tenaciously integrated into marketing campaigns, websites, interviews, and product pitches that they have effectively become agreed upon truth. In part 1, we learned how to know thy enemy by diving into these basic hacking techniques, the types of current hacking tools used, and the scope of these attacks. Today, in part 2, we will examine several popular cybersecurity myths, including attackers need to be right just once and the defenders need to be right all the time, more security products means better security, and you don't need to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend.
We'll start off the session today with a brief overview of open source intelligence and go through the pyramid of pain. We'll do some myth busting using examples from security incidents and recent security research and look at how you can defend your galaxy. And finally, SASE to the rescue. We'll discuss how Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, revolutionizes network security and performance. More importantly, we'll discuss how SASE is different from traditional solutions such as SD-WAN and how it is revolutionizing approaches to edge network security performance and compliance. We'll also better understand what SASE is capable of, including Firewall as a Service, CASB, DLP, Zero Trust Network Architecture, and SWIG. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you. So just a brief overview of open source intelligence. Generally speaking, open source intelligence, refers to essentially the collection of data that is like publicly available. So things that we can easily find on the internet through either very simple means such as Google or sometimes more advanced means like, specialized search engines that, are cataloging like various computer systems, IPs, services on the internet. This could also include like information from various news articles, social media, government reports, academic research, basically anything that's on the internet that can be used to, infer some information about a target. Generally speaking, this information can be gathered manually or it's automated through tools such as like web crawlers and data mining software, generally specialized software used to, mass collect this information. We see it increasingly used by governments, law enforcement agencies, and intelligence organizations for national security purposes, not to mention employers. It's generally a very cost-effective way of collecting lots of information you just need a computer, you just need the internet, you just need some basic tools that are available to basically anyone. So we'll break open source intelligence into various categories. So one, reconnaissance. So, as I kind of spoke about before, open source intelligence can be used to conduct reconnaissance on a target's network or systems. You can identify things such as like operating systems, software used, services that are running on a public network. This can help a threat actor identify vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Next thing we could talk about is social engineering. So, going back onto the topic about social media, news, threat actors will use what's publicly available information on social media from news articles to create social engineering attacks and use these to basically target specific individuals to make something seem very convincing. That could be in the form of like a phishing attack. And that's generally what you would see there in terms of social engineering. The next thing would be identifying vulnerabilities. So threat actors can use open source intelligence to identify vulnerabilities in a target's network or systems. They will use publicly available information to identify unpatched software. So this will be in the form of like, scanning IPs and ports, or, using one of these customized search engines on the internet to help them find, systems that are exposed to the internet that may be vulnerable. And the tools out there are plentiful. Like there's a lot of them. And I'm sure many people on this call, on this webinar, have had some exposure to these tools in the past. The next, and that ties into like conducting reconnaissance. So like, when you're doing reconnaissance on a target, you definitely want to figure out what systems these people are running that are publicly exposed to give you that in, so you can, find your wedge into their network and then start, collecting even more information to, plan your second phase of your attack and move laterally through that network. That brings us to planning attacks. So, the accumulation of all these different things that you can gather from open source intelligence, lets threat actors plan attacks against like their targets. So, generally that's going to be a very multi-pronged approach. So, it's never just going to be like one thing that, someone finds that, is going to be used to compromise a network, but, a combination of many vulnerabilities and like holes. So I think that's about it in terms of the overview.
Hi, everyone. So thank you for joining the second portion of this webinar, and thank you for having me here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about cybersecurity myths. I go to a lot of security conferences, I hear a lot of talks, and there are these myths that are constantly shared by different vendors, by different researchers, that not only are not really true, I think they're actually harmful. Now, I understand where some of them come from, and I'll explain the history behind them, but these myths are something we need to get rid of if we really want to be able to work and be able to defend ourselves against some of the recent cyber attacks and some of the trends that we're seeing in the criminal underground. Before we jump into the myths, and at the end also a little bit about the solution, of course, I want to talk about this concept, the pyramid of pain, which is a concept that was created by David Bianco, and it really shows you how or what it is that you need to do in order to bring pain to the attacker. And it's in the shape of a pyramid. If you look at it from the bottom up, you'll see that if you blacklist or block or stop stuff like hash values, so signatures of malware or viruses, IP addresses, if you block certain IP addresses, domain names, and network or host artifacts, while I would never say don't do it, the problem is those things are very easy for the attacker to change and to adjust to your defenses. And they actually take a lot of work out of the defender, but they don't really hurt the attacker. I'll give you an example, just a couple of examples. If you think about hash values, like let's say malware signatures, right? If you sign a malware and you add that signature to antivirus, you can protect from that malware. You can detect it every time it hits your network. However, today, most malware is what we call server-side polymorphic, which means every time the same malware infects a different host, it infects it with a different signature. And so just trying to constantly sign these different variants is not only, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's just a lot of work, and you don't really get any benefit out of it because it's really no problem for the attacker. Same goes, for example, for IP addresses, right? You can block IP addresses, and sure, I encourage companies to block certain IP ranges and certain IPs that are associated with cybercrime and different threat actors. However, it's really easy for the attacker to change that IP. So the first four, while you can do it, don't really hurt the attacker. Where do you really start hurting the attacker? When you get into their tools, for example. If you understand how they build their tools and how to stop them, not just by a mere signature, but understanding their behavior and what they actually do, you're going to really hurt the attacker. Because think about it, if they invest hours, days, months in developing a tool which you have beforehand, either through some open source intelligence or through some intelligence service, or you've got some of the code, or you understand how to identify its behavior, you're really hurting them because changing that code takes a lot of effort. But where do you really hurt the attackers? That's in the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Once you get into their head and you understand how they operate, to the point that you can almost predict some of their future actions once a breach starts, that's extremely painful for the attacker, because that's kind of changing the MOs or how they think and how they operate. And you'll see how all of these concepts of, looking at very specific IP or hash values versus looking at behaviors and understanding the attackers, how it all relates both to the myths that we're going to bust right now, 4 of them. There's a lot, but I think we'll only do 4 today, the top 4. And also how it correlates with a SASE solution that really focuses on TTPs and not just on hash values and IP addresses. So let's move to the first myth, and that is the attacker needs to be right just once. The defenders have to be right all the time. And oh my God, how many times have I heard this one? You can Google it. You'll find articles that are talking about it. And one of the reasons I really hate this myth is because about 10 years ago, I used to believe in it. I used to say it myself, all the attackers need to do is getting once and it's done, right? And us, the defenders, we have to defend all the time and we have to be 100% right. And that's not really true. If we take a look at the next slide, you'll see, I think it has to do a lot with how we approach this problem. And I really love this quote from Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. Why is that important? Because if you look at the threats that we're dealing with, phishing, malware, even ransomware, which is not something new. Ransomware started in the late 90s. It bloomed actually 7 years ago, and now it has kind of resurfaced in the last 3 years, I'd say. But all these different attacks are not something that we have not seen before. So we need to change our mantra on how we approach the problem. And let me give you an example of this. One of the most annoying things for me as a security researcher to read and see are these articles that discuss breaches. And each article you read, you will see that it has this one headline, right? So if you take a look here, hackers breach Colonial pipeline using compromised passwords. So it points to as if it's a fact that only compromised passwords are the problem, right? Or SQL injection flaw in billing software tied to US ransomware. So SQL injection, so bad coding or bad input validation, that's the problem, right? Hackers breach Lineage OS via unpatched vulnerabilities. So just unpatched vulnerabilities are the problem, right? Or if we go through these, you'll see Twitter, it was an inside hacker. And there was another one, right? A hacker takes more than 55 million due to phishing attacks. The problem that I have with all of these different headlines is they all point to a single problem. And that just shows a misunderstanding of what attacks actually look like. Because you think for Colonial, you think it's only a compromised password problem. Colonial had a lot of other security solutions in place, and yet the attackers were still successful in compromising them. Twitter, insider, sure, an insider is a huge problem because insiders, have access to a lot of different things. Usually they're privileged and so on, but there's still a lot of security solutions in place that can stop it. So when you read about a breach, don't fall for these headlines that talk about a single point of failure. No, a breach is a systematic and complete collapse of all the security systems you had in place. And we see this over and over and over again. And to demonstrate that a breach is not just a single event, what I've done here is I took the Revo ransomware, which are a pretty well-known ransomware gang, and I used the MITRE ATT&CK framework to explain how they work. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, get yourselves familiar with it. It's an amazing tool to understand how adversaries operate. And just to explain really briefly what you're looking at here, this table actually shows you on the top the different tactics that attackers use, going from left to right during a breach, right? So from reconnaissance and resource development and initial access to execution and persistence, all the way to exfiltration and impact. And what you can see here, the list on the bottom is actually a list of the techniques that the attacker can use for each one of these, the list of the techniques for each one of these tactics. So if you look at Revo, I highlighted in red what their typical attack looks like. So usually they do initial access through drive-by compromise, then execution is usually done through WMI, and so on and so on. But usually when you read about these breaches, you read about them at the point of impact when data has been encrypted. But look at how many steps the attackers had to successfully achieve in order to get to that point. So don't sell me that whole the attackers need to be right just once. No, they need to be right just once in each and every stage, which means they need to be right a lot of times. As opposed for the defenders, for example, we need to be right just once in order to detect, mitigate, or prevent this attack, right, in each and every step. So what I want us to think about, and you'll see this towards the end of my section here, is don't think about all of these red squares as problems. They are actually opportunities for defenders to catch and stop the attacks. I'll even use another word instead of opportunities. All of these can be used as choke points on the attack. If you have a system in place to actually detect these, you can actually stop it. And it's easy for me to say that, right? Oh, if we only had a system, right? So if we go to the second myth, a lot of people think that the more security products that you have better security, right? Because you have a lot of different problems, a lot of different red squares, so you need a lot of different solutions. Actually, if we look at what it looks like, this is by Michael Fisher. I like this graphic, and the depressing thing about it, it's not even the complete list. So what you see here are different layers of security, and for each layer, you can see there's multiple point solutions to help you protect that layer, or should I say, not just protect, but to actually utilize and create it even. The problem with this is, and I understand where this is coming from. This is coming from the idea of multi-layered protection, which I love, I agree with, but you can't have 5 solutions, 10 solutions for each layer. You know, if you look at statistics, small to medium businesses today use between 20 to 40 security solutions. Large businesses use over 60. How do you manage all of that? Now, I understand that it's very cool maybe for Hollywood or for certain articles to show the security analyst sitting in front of 6 or 8 screens. Might look like a cool picture, but that poor security analyst is now working all day trying to correlate and coordinate information from so many different systems. You know, how do I take my threat intelligence feeds and how do I put them into the firewall and into the SIM? How do I distribute it to the endpoint? How do I take feedback from the endpoint and feed it back up? How do I utilize it in my DLP and in my CASB? You know, if you ask me, this is one of the reasons we see huge burnout rates in cybersecurity. We're taking smart people who want to do cybersecurity and we're turning them into integration engineers who are sitting in front of multiple security solutions trying to make sense out of all of it, and they have endless integration projects. Not to mention the fact that it also turns people into experts in specific software and, you know, champions in that organization, and when they leave, what does the organization do then? They have a big hole. So this is a big problem. Now, I understand it's easy for me, Itai, to say, you know, don't do it like that. Security today, and we looked at this specific slide in the first episode of this webinar. You know, the security landscape, or I should say the network landscape, has significantly changed for the organization in the last 10, 15 years, because everything now is distributed. You have people working from home, you have cloud applications which are not under your control, you have third parties coming into your network and so on. So it's really hard to actually take control over all of it, and people end up with multiple security solutions. Not to mention the fact that we mentioned last time, that people don't really see the network as the attackers do. You know, if you look at which cloud applications are the most popular on customers' network, and that's something that I do as part of a report we generate with over 1,700 customers that we have. You know, the top 5 most used cloud apps are pretty common, as you can see here. But then you see TikTok in number 23 is the 23rd most used cloud application in corporate networks in 2022, which is crazy. And you see things like Tor nodes, and you see all kinds of forums and applications that maybe you don't want running on your network. So it's extremely hard to secure all these different edges and all the different users and all the different cloud applications, especially considering you have so many applications to do it with. And you know, unfortunately, there's only very small number of organizations in the world that can say, I'll hire more people. Think about small, medium organizations. I mean, sometimes the IT people are the security people, are the help desk people, right? Sometimes it's not even that, or they have very limited resources, 2, 5 people on the security team. How many security point solutions can these teams really not only implement, but fully utilize and manage and follow and look at all the logs? It's not a simple situation. Now, we go to the next. I know I'm only saying I'm talking about problems. We'll get to the solutions as well. This is something that, you know, I see in the media and I see from different security vendors as well. You get a feeling as if these sophisticated threat actors that we constantly read about use very sophisticated tools, you know. And don't get me wrong, I'm a security guy, I'm a technical guy. You know, get me starting to talk about the latest 0-day and I'll be sitting here speaking for 45, 60 minutes, not a problem. I love these things. But the matter of the fact is, threat actors don't necessarily, I should say, use sophisticated tools. Sure, some nation state actors, when they're targeting very specific targets, will use very customized solutions. But it's not that way in most of the attacks. And don't believe me, I'll let the criminals say it. So what you're looking at here is actually a slide from a presentation by Brooke Chelmo. It was presented at RSA 3 years ago, RSA Asia, I believe. It's called 2 weeks with a Russian ransomware cell. And in that interview, Brooke actually interviews a Russian ransomware group in Russia and talks to them about their history and motivations and so on. One of the questions he asked them is, okay, what do I do to protect myself from you guys? And I stole this slide from him, but you know, credit to him. Here's what they said: secure vulnerable ports, use proper passwords, watch for misconfigured firewalls. This is not like a, oh my God, I can't believe they're saying that moment. Or maybe it is, because they're not saying that they're using special techniques. They're saying they're using the same stuff that they've been using for years. So maybe the problem is not the problem, and maybe the problem is our attitude towards the problem, right? Because these things, we've been talking about it in the security, if we can stay on the last slide, we've been talking about it for years now. Actually, if you ask some of our incident response people, they'll tell you 90% of the incidents that they see are due to misconfigured security solutions. So people implement these point solutions, but they misconfigure them, or they don't configure them at all. They put them in place, but they don't have the time or bandwidth to actually sit and properly monitor and use them. And the attackers are taking advantage of it. The next example that I have is actually from a ransomware discussion. So in this case, this is from a very long discussion. I'm only showing the last portion of it, where the attackers ransomed a pretty big company. And after the company agreed to pay $3.7 or $3.8 million, I can't remember exactly, the attackers actually followed up with this message through, they have this negotiation application for negotiating the ransom. They told them, here are a list of recommendations to avoid such things in the future. Turn off local passwords, force end of administrative sessions. You know, these are security 101 things. Look at this one. I think it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one. check the granted privileges for users to make them maximum reduced privileges and access only the exact applications. First of all, just based on the English, you know that these are Russian in origin because it's a direct translation, but make them maximum reduced privileges. They are spelling out zero trust without saying zero trust. Okay, so even the attackers are saying, you know, use the common things that you should be doing anyway. Configure your systems. Don't reuse passwords. Apply zero trust architecture. Otherwise, we're in. So no, attackers don't necessarily need to use super sophisticated tools. The old stuff still works, unfortunately. Now, I think the last myth that we have, oh, sorry, I forgot about this slide. I have a lot of memes. This is one of my favorite, right? So you have a lot of different problems today. The security and network teams have to deal with. And unfortunately, if we scroll through this, unfortunately, you think that point solutions are coming to the rescue, but at the end of the day, these point solutions just add more work for the security teams. You know, I challenge security operations centers and ask them, with more and more security products that you implement, are you adding more muscle or are you adding more fat? What do I mean by that? Are you adding more stuff on you that will make you work harder, or are you adding stuff that actually helps you? Because in most cases, you're actually adding more weight to yourself rather than more muscle. And the last myth that we're going to discuss today, which will lead us also to the solution, is you don't have to outrun the bear, just have to outrun your friend. If you're not familiar with the classic story, right? Two friends go to the woods, set up a camp, go to sleep at night, and they wake up in the middle of the night because they hear a large noise outside. They open the tent and they see 50 feet away from them a huge bear coming towards them. So one of the guys says, hey, you know, if we don't move and play dead, the bear won't attack us. The other guy, you know, gets down and starts putting his shoes on. So the first guy asks him, what, you think you can outrun the bear? He says, no, but I can outrun you, and that's good enough for now, right? And I keep hearing this, people say this like half jokingly or not, you just need to be a little bit better than other businesses, right? Just implement two-factor authentication or just implement these 2-point solutions and you're already better off than the other guy, and the attackers will go for the lower hanging fruit. Wrong. Very, very wrong. If you're tasty enough, the bear will run for you. And we see this over and over and over again. Let me show you a couple of examples. So in this case, I'm going to show you 2 ransomware attacks that we've analyzed in the last, one is about 8 months old and one is from about 12 months. So what you're looking at here on the left-hand side is actually the phases of the infiltration of the attackers. So this company, I'll tell you, this is a company that deals with oil and chemicals, actually reached out to us following a ransomware attack, and they said, hey, we've been ransomed, can you help us? And I sat with the security team and asked them, okay, tell me what happened. So they said, okay, they got in through a phishing attack. So I stopped them right there and said, hold on, don't you have any anti-phishing solution? And I quote the IT manager and said, yes, but the attackers got lucky. I was like, okay. And then once the attackers, somebody clicked on the phishing email, the attackers connected to an external site and downloaded a payload. This payload actually gave initial access for the attackers, who continued to phase 2, which was collecting admin passwords, installing all kinds of malware like Mimikatz and Cobalt Strike, stuff like that. And then they encrypted the company. After that, before encrypting the company, they also uploaded the data out of the system. And this company had security solutions for each and every one of these phases, but they didn't find it, you know. And when I questioned them, they actually pushed back at me and said, you know, Itai, you know how many alerts we get on a daily basis from each one of these systems? It's like finding the needle in the needle stack, not the needle in the haystack even. So it's really hard. And I'm like, okay, I understand, but that's exactly the issue with so many solutions and so many logs. So what we did is we took this attack and we ran it against our system, against Cato's SASE solution. And immediately, as you can see on the top screenshot here, our system stopped it and it said, okay, we're seeing a phishing attack. How do we know it's a phishing attack? Because we're seeing a URL that we've never seen before. We have over 1,700 customers and so many end users that we're protecting. This is the first time we see that URL. something is very suspicious, stop it. But I said, okay, suppose we missed it for some reason. I don't know why we would miss it, but suppose the system missed it. What's next? So it said, okay, now we're blocking something what we see on the network. The attackers are using Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a tool that's used to collect admin passwords. This is not something I want to see on any network. And so if I see it, I probably should stop it. And our system stopped it. I said, okay, let's say we didn't stop it. What's next? Okay, so the IPS system now said, before it was the anti-malware, now it's the IPS, the intrusion prevention system, that said, oh, we're seeing Cobalt Strike being used. Cobalt Strike is a tool you could be used for a penetration testing tool, but it can be used, of course, by attackers, and many attackers use it. Nobody should be using Cobalt Strike on your network. Okay, so if we're seeing it, something bad is happening. And you can see if we move on, each and every step of the way has been stopped. We're seeing some here, and in the next slide, you'll see that even the exfiltration, if we click through this all the way to the, that's it, yep. So you can see here, even when the attackers tried on the simulation versus our system, when they tried to exfiltrate the data out, you can see that they were using a tool called rclone that was blocked by our system, because that's not a tool you want to see on your network either. And even say that they used a different tool, usually they send it to a website called Mega. We stop uploads to Mega because we know that's a typical TTP of attackers, right? Because you want to get into their head and how they work. So that's we blocked even the exfiltration. Another example, again, moving just to stay sure that we're on time. Another example is of ransomware as a service attack. So in this example, the company reached out to us. So this is a company from Texas, and they approached us and said that they've been ransomed. And when I talked to the security team, I started putting kind of the puzzle together. First thing they told me is they were already ransomed in the past. So 18 months before this attack, they were ransomed, and they paid twice. Once for the attackers to give them the decryption key, and the second time for the attackers not to release the information on one of their underground or one of their dark web leak sites. So that's an interesting point to remember. They've already been attacked once, okay? I asked them to describe the attack, and they said that the attackers got in through a third-party credentials that they obtained, which is something very typical. But what was really interesting is they said they were ransomed within minutes. Now, that's not very typical. Usually attackers need to take their time, understand what the network looks like, find all the crown jewels, and it takes time. So how did the attack start and end within 3 minutes? That was really interesting. So that was another piece of information I put on the side. And then came the final part where the IT team told me, you know, they tried to ransom 2 Exchange servers that don't exist. And that's when I told them, okay, I understand exactly what happened here. Here's what happened. The first guys that attacked you 18 months ago, you paid them twice, but they still had more money to make. How? They sold your infrastructure, what your infrastructure looks like, to another ransomware group. This is the group that attacked you. So this group knew everything about your environment already. So that's why also the attack only took 3 minutes, because they actually wrote scripts ahead of time. They didn't need to discover anything. They already knew what your network looked like, and then they just run the scripts and they ransomed your whole company. But that's also why they tried to ransom 2 servers that weren't there, because between the first attack and their attack, you guys decommissioned 2 Exchange servers. But this is exactly the moment that all the red lights should be flashing in your SOC. Why is somebody trying to, gain access to a server that's not there? That's a clear indication that something bad is happening on your network. So you really have to think about these things like a cyber criminal and say, oh, just because I paid these guys twice, maybe they'll leave me alone. No, there's more money for them to be made. If we go to the next slide, you'll see it all starts and ends with your visibility to the network, okay? Because you need to have clear threat intelligence and clear understanding of what's happening on your network. And this information always has to be actionable, reliable, and timely, because if it's only information that's actionable and reliable, but it's not timely, you get the alert very late, then that's old news. The attackers are already in. If it's reliable and timely, but not actionable, then it's just a feed. I can give you a lot of threat intelligence information, but if it's not actionable, what are you going to do with it? Right? It's just overloading you. And if it's reliable and timely and not actionable, it's false positive. So you really don't want to deal with those. It's only when you get all three, reliable, actionable, and timely, that you get true security. So how do you get there? And I only have like 2 more slides very quickly, and I'll hand it over to Alex. So at Cato, we have what we call the single pass engine, the only true single pass engine in the market. What is this single pass engine? So the first element of it is it takes in all the network flows, right? I said you have to be aware of everything that's happening. If it's it doesn't matter if it's coming from a branch, from a user, from a cloud app, from an IoT, you need to have complete visibility to everything that's happening on your network. If you don't have complete visibility, that's exactly the vector the attackers are going to use. Once you have clear visibility, you need to contextualize it. Okay, so we saw this communication. Which account did it come from? Which device was used to do this? Which application is running to do this? So you contextualize everything that you see. Once you contextualize it, of course, you need to have some form of policy, right? Okay, so this is what happens. What happened? I can see it. What do I want to do with it? We need to have some form of policy that is applied to everything, everywhere at the same time. You cannot have different policies for users who are in the branch and outside the branch, or for cloud applications versus third parties. The policy must also follow the user wherever you are, wherever they are, right? Doesn't matter if it's from different countries, different locations, and so on. You need to have a unified policy. Otherwise, you'll be sitting in front of multiple solutions trying to correlate these policies. And if you have a lot of security policies, the last step is to actually enforce them, right? You have to enforce them, access, network, and security, all these different solutions, but not as point solutions, all under one pane of glass. So if you want to do something, you don't have to install new boxes and new devices in order to implement these. When you have something like this, as we do in the cloud, it's a matter of like a tick box. Oh, you want DLP? No problem. Click, you got DLP. You don't need to now go to multiple branches and install boxes. Not only that, you're growing. We have more users. How do I update the throughput? Well, you don't have to buy a new box that can handle more throughput. It's just a matter of configuration. It's all in the cloud. Now, what we're actually trying to do and doing, of course, if we click again, you'll see, remember that picture that I showed you at the beginning with all the networks? This is kind of the solution to it, right? Instead of having all these multiple layers with tons of point solutions, now you have everything that's done in the cloud and implemented for you. If we go to the next slide, that's the one I was referring to, right? So we saw this. Instead of having something like this where you discover the attack when you're being ransomed, so actually the final step of the attack, what we want to have happening is, you'll see in the next slide, is we want to have actually choke points in each and every point. That's marketing really hates me for doing slides like this, but that's the maximum that I can do with PowerPoint, right? But all of these, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of these are not problems. All of these are actually choke points that allow you to stop the attack through one system instead of trying to implement multiple point solutions and actually missing all these attacks. And with that, I will hand it over to Alex to discuss it on a little bit of a higher level, the architecture and the solution.
Thank you, Itai. I'll talk a little bit about Cato's approach to solving some of these challenges that Itai discussed now and at our previous webinar a couple of weeks ago. But before we get into that, I think it would be important to talk about Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE. This is a concept that Gartner brought forward in 2019. And at this point, I believe there is a consensus within the industry that this is the best approach to move forward with. SASE is addressing two main problems here. One is improving user experience, which is driving productivity, and ensuring highest level of security across all edges, which today, obviously, there are many. According to Gartner, Secure Access Service Edge is convergence of networking and security capabilities delivered as a cloud service. The networking component of this service are mostly geared towards addressing user experience and providing scalable, flexible, low latency connectivity, while security is delivered by providing layered services that are equally capable of providing deep inspection of traffic and understanding the context, as Itai was just talking about, the context of user, device, application, and other entities on that network. In order to be able to deliver these capabilities to all users and locations across the globe, and to be able to respond quickly to rapidly changing network conditions, this has to be cloud delivered service. So what capabilities will SASE converge? With all of those point products that Itai was referring to earlier, including the SD-WAN, secure web gateway, firewalls, CASB, DLP solutions, and even VPN, replaced by, again, a point that Itai brought forward earlier, zero trust network architecture, and limiting that access to only the application that's required at the time when it is required. So if we move over to the next slide, you'll see that beyond convergence, you also need global presence. So you need to be able to deliver these capabilities to all your users and locations across the globe. What you're looking at here is a graphical representations of Cato's 75 plus, I think we're close to 80 points of presence across the globe today. And we continue to add these at the rate of about 2 a quarter. But even from this, you'll see that we're already present at pretty much all the major business centers across the globe. All these different points of presence are interconnected with multiple redundant tier 1 providers that are forming this global private backbone. If you click through here, please. So at the core of each of the POPs is one more click, please. At the core of each of these POPs is our converged software, the single pass cloud engine, and Itai was just discussing it earlier. And there's 2 main components to this solution. One is the multi-gig packet processing engine. This the part of the engine will extract context from the network flow and understand the direction and destination of the traffic entering the network and ensure optimal delivery mechanism for that traffic. The other component is the real-time policy enforcement. So all the security features that are built into solution are immediately applied to that traffic as soon as the traffic hits the POP. The important distinction here is we're not service chaining within the solution. All these engines are acting in parallel, so there's no penalty that the user pays in terms of degraded performance. Now, if we click again, you'll see that the way for our customers to connect to Cato POPs is through these sockets, which are devices that are deployed to locations like a data center or a head office that are forming DTLS tunnels to the closest best performing POP. Again, once these sockets are connected to the POP, all the policies, networking, and security are applied. The users are connecting, again, from anywhere across the globe to a POP that's geographically closest to them. And as soon as they connect, all those security policies are applied to them. Now, there's a big importance that I want to place on our global private backbone. As soon as a location, the data center, a branch office, or a user connects to our POP, we're taking that traffic away from the internet, and we are placing them on our global private backbone. Now we can provide a lot better user experience. We have predictable latency, we have predictable jitter and packet loss, especially across longer distances. I'll give you an example that I always use. We're a global company and we're a Salesforce customers, but our Salesforce instance is in Frankfurt in Germany. When I connect from home, I live in Burlington. When I connect from home, I connect to a Toronto POP. I go over the private backbone to a Frankfurt POP where I egress out to our Salesforce tenant. And my performance, the user experience that I get is a lot better than if I was using unpredictable internet connection. Now, a lot of our customers are expanding into cloud and moving some of their workloads there. If you are doing today, it's very easy to just deploy a virtual socket that are exactly the same as physical ones in terms of capabilities, but it will also save some of the cost that you would incur, but by provisioning express route, direct connect, and other solutions that are not performing as well, do not have security capabilities, but are also much more expensive. Now, in terms of SaaS and web applications that your users can access, there is no configuration that you necessarily have to make. As soon as the user connects, those applications are available to them. You can create egress rules to improve the performance, and then you can create your security policies to make sure that, I'll give you simple examples. Twitter can be read-only, so or Facebook. Your users can read posts and comments, but might not be able to make one themselves. Or they can connect to LinkedIn and have conversations with their colleagues, but might not be able to browse job boards during the day. And then the last component that I wanted to discuss here is our single management console. And I think this also is something that Itai was talking about earlier, being able to get insights that are valid, actionable, and timely. So everything is done from the single pane of glass. You never have to leave the Cato management application, which is this single management console, to go to another system to correlate some of these events. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris and Amber.
So why SASE? There's actually a lot of reasons why SASE. We discussed some of them now, but here are three that immediately come to mind when you're thinking about implementing it. First of all, it's ease of management. I know I said it over and over and over again this session, but managing 20 to 40 solutions or over 60 solution, not practical. And we see the results in real life, right? You can't manage all these alerts and all these logs and configure all these things. And by the way, we didn't even start talking about patching, right? Some of these security tools that you read about, different firewalls and VPNs, are actually used as the entry tool for the attackers because they're unpatched and they're vulnerable. So ease of management is extremely important, especially not only for small businesses, obviously, especially for small businesses and medium businesses, but also for large organizations that are very distributed and have very complex networks, and you have multiple vendors, multiple solutions, and it's a mess. It can't be managed. The second one is, and I mentioned this as well, is visibility. You have to be able to see everything. If you don't, that is exactly the vector the attacker is going to use to get in. And as we have seen, these attacks, they use multiple tactics and techniques. You have to have complete visibility to everything that's happening in your network. That can only be done using a cloud implementation, a cloud-based solution, and can only be managed through something like a SASE architecture. The third is flexibility. I mentioned it, but we didn't talk about it enough. Today, think about it. You want to buy a firewall, or you want to buy an IPS. So you're buying a box, right? Not a cloud solution, you're buying a box, but you're buying a box that's good for you right now. What happens if the company grows? So maybe you should buy a bigger box, but you're paying now for something that you may need in the future. Why are you paying for it right now? And vice versa as well. And that's just a size, let's say, with users. What about throughput? What about capabilities, right? You buy a firewall. Tomorrow you want DLP or CASB, or you want an IPS or an next gen anti-malware. All of these, you're stacking up boxes that you have, again, to manage, to patch, to create the policies in. Instead of that, a SASE solution allows you to actually have everything in the cloud, and everything is configurable just literally with a click of a button. You want a certain solution, it's no problem implementing it. You need to make it bigger, smaller, it's all a matter of just configuration. So this flexibility is extremely important and also helps a lot with costs. Like I said, there's a lot of reasons why you would want to implement a SASE solution. These are the three immediate ones that come to my mind.
Excellent discussion, Itai and Alex. That was very insightful as usual. So just want to bring it over to like the audience and to answer any questions that they may have. So we have a few questions already. If anyone has any, please submit them into the chat. So the first question I have here is someone asked, based off of your Salesforce example about connecting to a remote Salesforce instance in a different country over the Cato backbone, how well would this apply to other solutions that may not be geographically close? So something like VDI, for instance, or some self-hosted voice over IP solution.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That it would be applicable to all those use cases. You might have, and I think we have a lot of customers even here in Canada that would have call centers, for example, in Philippines or anywhere offshore. If we can place that traffic on our global private backbone as close to the end user as possible, and then utilize the global private backbone, so the performance of those links, which are, as I said earlier, multiple tier one providers, that user will have a lot better experience than just using the internet. I'll give you an example. We were talking to a customer yesterday, and they had workforce in Sydney, in Australia, connecting to a resource within their location in New York. I looked at our pop-to-pop latency from Sydney to New York, and for the last month, it was around 250 milliseconds round trip time. So about 120 in a single direction. So obviously a lot better compared to just regular internet traffic.
Yeah, that's excellent. So on that note as well, there's a question here about, the quote unquote digital nomads of, since COVID hit and people started kind of moving around the country, and I'm guessing there is a use case here for people who who are on the road constantly and potentially need to move actually like large amounts of data, like someone who does like film, for instance, right? And traditionally they would be connecting in with a slow VPN to a single data center. So would this be a valid use case for Cato networks, like using the Cato VPN?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, we would look at their geographical location and connect them to a POP that's maybe not necessarily the closest to them, but best performing. So that's another concept that we have to look at. Sometimes the closest one might not be the best one. And at the moment when they connect to our POP, again, we're taking them off the internet for all the traffic that's destined to either an internal resource or a cloud resource that they have a rule for. We would use that private backbone, improving their performance.
Awesome, thank you.
The idea is also not sacrificing security. I'll let Itai chime in here as well, because we can't sacrifice security in order to in order to impact performance. We have to do both at the same time. This is why the concept of SASE is really important.
Yep, I completely agree. And keep in mind, when Alex was now talking about the time, you really don't need to compromise in that. We talked about there's no service chaining. There's you don't have to jump. Some solutions that are out there, you do the DNS portion in one POP, and you do the DLP or some other solutions in another POP. We don't have anything like that. The space, the single pass engine that we have exists in each and every one of our POPs. So you don't have to compromise on security. You don't have to compromise on network latency, and you really don't want to do that, both for user experience, and of course for security reasons, that you don't want the attackers to be able to gain access or to have any sort of advantage.
Yeah, I mean, just personally, like with my customers, that's like the biggest thing I see is like, a million different points, as you pointed out, like a million different point solutions, and they have these complicated networks, and there's so many layers, and even just troubleshooting a problem sometimes is like very, very time consuming. So, I definitely am behind that message. It's beautiful, really. Like, so another question would be like future plans, like features that are coming into Cato. There obviously is like a large list of things that you guys are that's being done right now with Cato, the single pass engine. But what does the future hold? If you can tell us.
I'm trying to think what I can say that I'm allowed to say, because I can tell you, I've seen some demonstrations by our product team for different solution, for different capabilities to stop stuff, for example, on endpoints with correlation with the cloud, which is really so powerful and so amazing. It's hard to shock me as a security guy. I was shocked when I saw some of these capabilities and how it's able to, in that single pass engine, correlating so many different types of information. And I hinted towards one example of these things, but we're not sitting on our laurels and hey, everything is good. No, as everybody here I assume knows, security is an ongoing thing. It's something that you constantly need to adapt to how attackers are working and operating. And so we have a bunch of very, very interesting, again, I think the product team will kill me if I start talking about features that I've seen, but really interesting stuff and capabilities.
Awesome. Just another question too from someone in one of the viewers. They're asking about when you mentioned about TTPs before and Cato and how Cato really caters to that top part of like the pyramid of pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just want a bit of elaboration on that point as well. Is that specifically like the visibility Cato gives into all the network traffic going over, or just the just a bit more clarification on that point?
Sure, it's actually a combination of all the things that we've seen that allows us to deal with the TTPs rather with the lower hanging stuff like the just the IPs. So we have the capabilities to correlate so much information. Alex mentioned, that these systems this is not service chain. They all look at the packet at the same time. So let me give you an example. If we see a new phishing or a suspicious URL, one system may say, I've never seen this URL in my life, super suspicious. Another may say, I actually think it's not suspicious because of certain characteristics. And we use different, I know it's kind of, everybody says it, machine learning, AI, and so, but we use all kinds of categorizations to be able to say, is this malicious or not? And we actually, it's really interesting when you look at the at our application and you look at how a decision was made, you can see how each system actually contributed to contextualizing the information and come to a conclusion. And so that's how you actually get into the TTPs, not just by blacklisting a specific IP, but being able to say, what, something happened here on the network, and this thing also happened, and this thing also happened. Now, all three things are benign by themselves, but if you see all three of them, and you can analyze them, and you can say, each one by itself, each event by itself is benign, but when I see all three, I know something bad is happening. And that's a capability that allows you to actually get into the tactics, techniques, and procedures of attackers. We actually have a very large and very smart group of security researchers that sit and actually help these models, create these modules and these different heuristics for the system to be able to identify the different threats.
Say thank you to everyone who was able to join us today and join our webinar. I want to send thank you to Itai, Alex, and Chris. You guys did an amazing job as usual, and super grateful that you were able to share with us some of your time and some of your knowledge on this very important topic. Thank you again, gentlemen. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.